Yep. Yes.
Great. Okay, great, thank you. Before we get started, and first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for Air Quality 101. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We're trying to mute everybody from our console, and it works and it doesn't work sometimes. So please make sure you're muted. Also, we've disabled all webcams. So if you're viewing yourself, please know that we can't actually see you. So you might as well turn yours off as well so you don't have to stare at yourself. And I think that's about it. If for some reason you are experiencing any technical issues on your end that you think is being created on our end, please let us know by using the chat window. We've had some issues as we've tested out the slides in that they're kind of slow transitioning from slide to slide. If that continues to happen or it gets worse, we may kind of shut down the call and record something and send it out to you later. But everything I think is working smoothly so far. So just to get us started, again, thank you very much for participating in Air Quality 101 this morning. We think this is an important topic and it's timely right as ozone season has already begun and we're starting to get into kind of the bulk of our activities at MARC. I hope everybody is doing well, staying home as you're able, and definitely finding ways to make the most of this extraordinary time that we're living in. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and see if we can't advance here. So my name is Karen Clausen. I'm the Air Quality Program Manager at MARC, and I'm joined today by my colleague Doug Norsby, who is our MARC Air Quality Planner. Generally in this session, we hope to provide you with some of the basic information about air quality as it relates to our region and help build a better understanding about how our everyday actions impact our public health, and then also give you some takeaway actions that you can help promote in your networks. These are some of the different topics we'll be covering today. There's definitely a lot more that we can be sharing about air quality. A lot of people are doing different things. A lot of counties in our region are doing different things, but right now we're mostly going to be focused kind of at the regional level and the activities that MARC is undertaking. So I'm going to hand the controls over, hopefully this works, to Doug Norsby to get us started. Just a second, Doug, let me see if I can do this. Okay. Okay, Doug, you should be able to advance it. Let me know if you can.
Okay. Let's see. Still trying to advance the slide.
Okay. Let me see, I'll do it for you. There we go.
Okay. All right. So start a little bit. Start a little bit earlier than present day. We've had ongoing air quality issues that were kind of spurred on by the industrial age, and larger cities had been recognized as having problems for quite a while before action started being taken. In 1939, St. Louis was one of those types of events. They actually had an event that lasted for 9 days, and it started on a Tuesday, and they called that the day the sun didn't shine. And it was just really thick smoke, a lot of sulfur dioxide. At the time, a lot of people used coal for heating, and there was a temperature inversion that came over and trapped that all down in St. Louis. But they weren't the only ones. So you had some of these different events. In Donora, Pennsylvania, one of the events that caught a lot of attention in 1948, a small coal mining town just outside of Pittsburgh had a bunch of emissions come over from a manufacturing plant. It was a wire manufacturer that had like zinc oxides that they were using in production. In that event, there were 20 people who were killed. Another 50 people died shortly thereafter. 6,000 people in this town of 14,000 were affected and had ongoing health problems related to that one event. Yeah, it was just, it really caught a lot of attention and kind of brought things home. The Air Pollution Control Act in 1955 was the first act that considered, at the federal level, considered air quality as a significant issue. It authorized funding to do monitoring and research on the effects of air pollution. At that time, there wasn't anything that was enforcement related. It was just to try to find out what the problem was. In 1963, they had the first Clean Air Act, and it was a landmark legislation. It was, for its time, it was one of the national, international standards for clean air legislation. It increased research again and effective monitoring and control techniques. So now they were actually looking at what kind of things could be done to control air pollution, which led the way into 1965 when they started doing some actual creation of standards. In 1965, they set auto emission standards for the upcoming years in 67, 68. So automobiles were recognized as one of those sources of pollution, and they were starting to act on that. 1967 saw an enforcement of interstate transport, more research on ambient monitoring, and the inspection of stationary sources. So you can see where this is kind of going. It's ramping up. Finally, in 1970, they had comprehensive state and federal regulations for both stationary and mobile sources. That was also the year that the EPA was established. So then there's a period of time, in about 1990, it became understood that there were other things going on related to air quality, such as acid rain, the ozone depletion, some additional air toxics. So all of those were wrapped into some amendments that came in the late 80s and were kind of culminated in 1990, which included the National Permitting Program and some guidance on new gas formula requirements and the Reid vapor pressure, which we've talked about. That should be it for that slide. Okay. When we talk about air quality and air pollution, we have 6 criteria pollutants that were identified by the EPA as being broadly applicable across the country, and that were recognized to have public health concerns associated with them. One is particulate matter, and there's the diagram on the right shows just how small that PM 2.5 is. It's being that the particles are so small, they can actually easily get trapped in our lungs and can cause problems related to both heart and lung issues. Lead was a recognizable problem. We had leaded gasoline for a long time, and the switchover has occurred. It occurred it started in the 70s, and so we got the lead was removed from gasoline, but there was still a lot of lead along roadways where vehicles had been driving for many, many years. Carbon monoxide is formed when you have incomplete combustion of materials, and it's a toxic gas. Sulfur dioxide is generally generated through production of electricity and power. It's also generated through some industrial processes. Nitrogen dioxide is another product of combustion, and it's important because it's one of the gases that then forms ozone, the O3. which is the next item on the list. So there's some monitoring going on right now for nitrogen dioxide along roadways to just see how close how bad the concentrations are close to freeways and other highly trafficked areas. But those nitrogen dioxides are also part of a NOx complex, various nitrogen compounds that help form ozone. Ozone is, again, the pollutant of concern for the Kansas City area. We have had some regular struggles with that. Go ahead and advance, if you would. So a little bit more about ozone. It's an interesting molecule. Again, the image that's on kind of the upper right corner of the screen there, the O3, shows the formation of that. Now, normally, oxygen wants to be a diatom. It wants to be an O2, where the two atoms are kind of evenly sharing things. As an O3, that additional oxygen atom has a weaker bond, and it wants to break off and form other things. So it's an oxidizer. This is chemically identical to the stuff that we have up at the upper level that we've heard so much about, the hole in the ozone layer, skin disease, skin cancers, and that kind of thing. There it's important because the ultraviolet light is constantly breaking it down and recreating it, and it serves as a shield of sorts. But at ground level, it's a man-made pollutant, which again is an oxidizer that damages the respiratory system. So that extra atom wants to break off, and it essentially wants to kind of erode other molecules. It wants to pull stuff off and form something that is a little less reactive. Now, ozone is not emitted directly. As I said, there's the NOx precursors, and then there's also volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. Those particular elements come from things like solvents and paints, the evaporative emissions from gasoline. So if you think of things like acetone, fingernail polish, all of those things that rapidly evaporate, a lot of those have VOCs. So at ground level ozone, where we have the problems with it, those VOCs and NOx come from cars, trucks, small businesses, utilities, and large industries. It's anywhere people are burning things, using fuel. It comes from paint shops, people who are out doing work on their decks or fences. So it comes from a lot of different sources. The ground level ozone concentrations typically become highest on calm, warm, and sunny days, where you have a lot of sunlight. VOCs and NOx on their own just kind of hang out. They don't mix. But when you have the sunlight beating on them, that creates the conditions for those two things to begin chemically reacting. So when you have a calm day without wind, and those two precursors are sitting in the environment, sitting in the air, then you have the sunlight that comes in and starts to bake on those. They start to react and they start to form ozone. Again, with warmth, the VOCs tend to evaporate more quickly. So you have a greater VOC load that's coming into it. There's just more precursors for that sunlight to work on. As that ozone, that ground level ozone is released, it can cause breathing problems, especially in those who have asthma, emphysema, or other respiratory conditions. It oxidizes those cells and creates problems. It also puts stress on the heart. So there are some national ambient air quality standards that have been identified by the EPA, and they are set for all of those criteria pollutants. And they're set at two different levels. The primary standards set limits to protect public health, which includes the health of those sensitive populations, like asthmatics, people who have those health problems, children whose lungs are still growing, elderly who may be somewhat have somewhat compromised immune systems, and outdoor workers or exercisers. So if you have somebody who's an athlete and doing a lot of running, they are exposing themselves to a lot of ambient air quality. But also think of construction workers who are kind of out there on the job. They don't necessarily have the ability to go inside and protect themselves on these high ozone days. Secondary standards are also in place, and those are to limit and protect public welfare, and that includes protection against decreased visibility, damages to animals, crops, vegetation. It'll decrease the return on farmable products, and it also causes damage to buildings. You'll see, especially in urban areas, some of the restoration work that they have to do is related to ozone. Every 5 years, there's a panel that reviews the literature that has developed on ozone and all the other criteria pollutants. They're all on a slightly different 5-year cycle. But they review the latest data that has come from the research fields and people in academia to see if the standard that has been set is effective to meet both the primary and the secondary standard. If they find that the standard is not as strong as it needs to be, then they will revise that standard and issue kind of a new level of compliance along with a different series, a different scale for the air quality index associated with that pollutant. And so how do we know whether or not we're actually in compliance with that standard? We have a network of regional air quality monitors that monitors the ozone levels as they move through into our area. Now, as I mentioned, ozone is it's a pollutant that is not emitted directly. It's got those multiple components to it. And because of that, because of the nature of the pollutant itself, it actually changes in concentration over space and time. It's a regional pollutant. It isn't something that happens really close to where something is directly emitted. It kind of follows the wind patterns. So to get a good idea of what's happening in the region, we have these widely distributed ozone monitors. The ones that are down toward the southwest, Heritage Park, Richards Gebauer. We also have one that is outside of our, well outside of our maintenance area to see what's coming from outside our region. But those give us an idea of what kind of ozone levels we're receiving into the Kansas City area as they get here. Then the additional monitoring network help us figure out how much we're generating locally. And it's that combination of transported ozone and locally generated ozone that generally sets our maximum numbers for the region that we'll typically see right around that Watkins Mill, Liberty, Rocky Creek, and Trimble sequence of monitors. And that's where everything kind of has had a chance to build and combine. On the right, that's one of the weather stations or the air monitoring stations that we have in our area. It's a self-contained unit. They're generally fairly tucked away to keep them away from any kind of vandalism. But it includes all kinds of different instrumentation for both ozone. Some of them have PM 2.5, and then a lot of meteorological data is also gathered at that same time. So as you can see, this is a 20-year chart of our maximum design values. Now, design values, it's a term that's associated with the standards again, those primary and secondary air quality standards are developed based on a rolling 3-year average. So if you have an individually bad year, if you have a time of drought that lasts for a year, the idea is that by rolling 3 years together to get a design value, you have a chance to kind of offset those unusual circumstances. The other thing that happens when they're calculating a design value is they look at what the 95th percentile would be. So you take the very highest days. You might have 2 or 3 days where you had just an extraordinarily high ozone level for whatever reason. There may have been fires. It may have just been a strange weather event that created some stagnation, and you kind of get a couple mulligans, I guess would be a way to think of it. And it's the fourth number, the fourth highest, that typically gets rolled into that 3-year average. So these numbers that are generated and shown for the maximum design values reflect a more they affect a better vision of what the quality of the air was for that year during that ozone season. And as you can see, we have been progressively improving. The little dotted lines show what the NAAOS standards were at the time those numbers were generated. And since we started doing this in 1999, on this graph, we've had 3 different adjustments in what was felt to be the safe level of ozone, ambient ozone, the ground level. So as you can see, in 2019, by the end of the year, our highest design value was a 68. And so we were under that air quality standard of 70. But again, as you see, we've been barely making it. We've teased that line an awful lot. Go ahead and on to the next slide. So to help make sure that we remain in compliance and continue to meet those standards, we have state implementation plans. You'll hear about SIPs, FIPs, and TIPs. And so SIPs are the state implementation plans, FIPs are federal implementation plans, and TIPs are tribal implementation plans. For our area, we have a state implementation plan from both Missouri and Kansas that we follow. They coordinate very, very well, and they communicate with each other and then with the federal government to identify what the monitoring is going to look like, what the enforcement of various rules will be, what to do if we start to have any kind of issues. There's different control measures that are in there. And all states have a SIP, regardless of whether they're in attainment, but it's that initial SIP is just to ensure that they have the infrastructure to monitor and maintain review of the air quality in the area, just to make sure that if anything does start to slide out of attainment, there's somebody who's paying attention and there's a capacity to do something about it. If a community, if a region has an area where they have been in non-attainment, are currently in non-attainment, or have been in the past, then that SIP goes on to show specific regulations that indicate how the state is going to ensure compliance by a certain date. And then that also includes contingency measures. So if things don't improve as much as is expected, there are additional things that are kind of in that plan that will be implemented. In order to be a definable implementation contingency measure, it has to be something that's quantifiable. It has to be something that's enforceable, it has to be permanent, and it has to be surplus. So it's a you have to it limits a little bit the types of things that are involved and can be used in a SIP, but it's something that you have a greater deal of confidence in it being measured and sustainable. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So in order to meet those standards, the state implementation plan looks across all the different industries that provide components of that pollutant. So with ozone, again, we're looking at both NOx and VOCs. And transportation, especially on-road mobile sources, are a major portion of ozone formation. 50% of our general everyday activities for any individual contribute to that total ozone pie. So as I mentioned earlier, those on-road mobile sources include emissions created by cars, trucks, transit, freight. It's not trains though. So trains would be something a little bit separate. But it's a large chunk of that, and that is an area that MARC and the local governments have quite a bit of ability to manage through development and choices of projects. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this leads me a little bit to conformity. It applies to both non-attainment and maintenance areas. The general conformity rule is that you're not going to deteriorate air quality conditions. If you get into strict conformity for non-attainment areas, there is additional work that needs to be done that measures how much pollution is going to change, whether it'll be increasing or decreasing due to the development of a particular project. So transportation conformity it's an important piece of ensuring that federal funding and approval goes to activities that are consistent with maintaining a good level of air quality for the region. Part of MARC's role is to make a conformity determination as they evaluate local projects for their transportation improvement plan and the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So those have to work in conjunction with the state implementation plan, which I just referred to, and the different controls that are associated with that. Together, that all leads to this transportation conformity, where we make sure that we don't increase the emissions that are generated out of the transportation sector. And that keeps that whole, it shrinks the pie a little bit by keeping the transportation pieces down. Let's go ahead and flip the next one. And I think this is about where I was going to go ahead and hand it over to Karen.
Yes. Okay. And Doug, go ahead and mute yourself. I'm wondering if some of the rustling sound that we were getting is coming from your microphone. It appears to have gotten better. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. So Doug made a good segue into talking about some of MARC's role in the region when it comes to the conformity determinations. And we do a lot of coordination in reaching that. But now I'm going to focus a little bit more on kind of what we do specifically at MARC in our air quality program. And you can see here kind of our overarching scope is really to provide regional forecasts related to ozone, and we also promote policy and actions that help improve the region's air quality. There's a few different facets of what we do. One is we develop a clean air action plan. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but essentially it puts together some regional strategies that can help us improve our air quality. We do public education and outreach every single year. We do that ozone forecasting and issue alerts, and then we also manage the air quality forum. Okay, so I'm going to start with the air quality forum. So the air quality forum has been around for a really long time. It was established by both the Kansas and Missouri governors. And this happened after EPA had designated the region as non-attainment for the 1975 ozone standard. Through the MOU that both of the governors signed, MARC was designated as the lead planning agency to help coordinate the states of Kansas and Missouri and their respective SIPs and make sure everything aligned as far as the components of those plans relevant to the Kansas City region. As I said, this air quality forum has been around for a really long time. Currently, we have, I think, 31 different members on that. While our air quality boundary is technically only Platte, Clay, and Jackson counties on the Missouri side, and Wyandotte and Johnson County on the Kansas side, the air quality forum actually includes all 9 counties within the MARC region. So we can do a lot better coordination throughout the region. We work to help the states with evaluation of control measures as they come forward, and we help identify some of the social and economic impacts. We also coordinate public involvement around some of the changes that might be related to the SIP or determining control measures for our region. The Air Quality Forum is an open public meeting, and there's information on the MARC website at marc.org if anybody is ever interested in participating in that meeting. And we're happy to kind of work with you as individuals if you are interested to catch you up on some of the different topics that we've worked through over time. The MARC Air Quality Forum is also kind of the overseers of the Clean Air Action Plan, which I'll talk about in just a second. So next I wanted to talk about ozone season activities. This is the bulk of the work that we do in the program that Doug manages. Ozone season in our region and most regions is from March 1st to October 31st. We typically don't really start seeing any sort of issues with ozone until May, but we keep a close eye on ozone as early as March 1. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but again, we also run that public education media campaign, and we do a lot of community outreach, so I'll touch on all of that. Okay, when it comes to forecasts, we at MARC don't actually do the forecasting ourselves. We work with a company called Whether or Not, and we're in constant communication with them about what is forecasted as far as ozone for the next day. We issue a daily skycast. If you're not familiar with our skycast, you can find that skycast very easily on our Twitter feeds which is at AirQKC or airqkc.org. We also put that information up there. And when we know that the skycasts are showing potential air quality issues for the next day, so whether it's an orange or yellow day, which corresponds to the scale you see here, we will issue an ozone alert. And some of the things that happen when we issue that is that we send out a news release to make sure that all of the newsrooms know that that's happening and they can communicate that. And you see a picture here of Neville from Channel 9 kind of issuing that air quality alert for the viewers and giving them some tips for staying healthy. We also work with KCATA, who they give half price fare on ozone alert days, and we'll be doing so up until they go fare free, of course. And then we push out information on social media as well. So even though we are mostly monitoring and forecasting ozone in our region, we did have an interesting issue come up last week where there was a heavy amount of pollution that came into our region, but it wasn't ozone, it was actually PM 2.5. So that was that particulate matter pollution. So this is what ozone looked like that Wednesday last week. can't really see anything on the map. But then this is what PM 2.5 looks like. And we typically don't issue alerts for anything other than ozone, but we did want to communicate to people through social media and a news release that there were high levels of PM 2.5 coming into our region. Maybe you noticed last week that you were coughing a little bit more, or you noticed kind of a haze and definitely an odor in the air. That was kind of smoke coming in from the Flint Hills controlled burns, which typically happens in the month of April. So we do pay attention to those burns and look for the impacts that might come into the Kansas City region. So public education and media campaign that we do every year. The focus of this is twofold. So we want to provide information to people so that they can do things that will immediately protect their health. We also want to provide information about activities that people can undertake to help reduce emissions in the region. So we're, asking people to consider behavior changes. That's more of a long game for us. But those are the two kind of core messages. We focus our public education and outreach in the months of April through September to hit kind of the core part of the ozone season. And we do messaging that's both general public, but also targeted. This last year in 2019, we decided based on our survey results from the prior year that we needed to focus on messaging for minorities, millennials, parents who might have kids, with asthma, and also rural areas that might experience some of the downwind pollution effects. Last year with all of our media outreach, and you can kind of see the breakout in that pie chart, we were able to reach over 58 million impressions. And here's a sample of some of the messaging that we put out. We did a lot of focus on transportation. So you'll see here we have, because bicycles don't have tailpipes and because sharing a ride cuts emissions in half. We were trying to keep our messaging really simple. And some of our results from our survey had shown that people understand the different things that they can do, but they have a hard time actualizing those different activities and getting the, actually doing them. So we decided to create kind of a tagline that was clean air, we've got this, kind of thinking that, we can do this together. And we'll be employing that same tagline again in the 2020 campaign. Here's some additional examples. We also included some Spanish language ads as well. And you'll see these ads in various channels, as you saw in that pie chart. We focus on billboards. We do a lot of sponsorships. We work with magazines. We do a lot of digital ads and social media as well. So on the outreach side, we have a program called the Workplace Partnership, where we're working with employers to provide information. We provide a monthly e-tips newsletter called Take Care of Your Air, and you can see a sample of that here. We provide information on ways that people can reduce their emissions from home and at work. And we have, I believe, over 160 different employers that receive that every month. We also do a series of emissions clinics. We partner with household hazardous waste drop-off days. There are 10 to 15 of those, I believe, over the year. And as people are exiting, having dropped off their household hazardous waste, they have the option to pull into our line where they can get a really quick emissions checkup on their car. It takes about 5 minutes, and we usually get about 20% of the household hazardous waste line, which is great. And this gives people a sense of how well their car is performing, and if there's any basic maintenance that they could be doing to help prevent some of the emissions that their car is putting out. We also work with Casey Corporate Challenge we do a carpool challenge with all the athletes. We have the different activities and the different the different participants in the different activities log their carpooling miles with us, and then they can win an award at the end. We're not doing it this year. Carpool Challenge was canceled because of COVID, but it's been a really great opportunity to us to talk to athletes out there who are more sensitive to air quality, and also help them think about different ways like carpooling where they can make some real impact. We also do a lot of tabling events. These happen at different types of events, whether it's Earth Day or working with employers. We'll provide information anytime somebody has something come up and they want us there. We're always open to do that. We put most of our information on airqkc.org. This is a really great resource that that we push out there that gives basic information about air quality, much of the same things that you're learning now, but also focus on what people can do at home and also at a community scale to help make our air better, and also at work. Again, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, our SkyCast is illuminated there. If you ever want to know what the SkyCast is, again, this is a great resource. Clean Air Action Plan. So this is our big strategy, our big plan for reducing ozone. Currently, the Clean Air Action Plan is in its third iteration. We last updated it in 2018, and we do so about every 5 years. And it's really focused on comprehensive strategies that are community-based, and they're all voluntary. Overarching strategies include reducing ozone-forming emissions, identifying strategies to reduce ozone, and complying with ozone NAAOS voluntarily. And here's kind of a long list of strategies that we've included in our Clean Air Action Plans over the years, and they've evolved over time. There's maybe less emphasis on power plant emissions reductions because we've seen a lot of great strides over the year. Power plant emissions reduction, power plant closings in general have been a significant reason why our design values have dropped since 1999. We continue to do diesel engine retrofits. Metropolitan Energy Center is a big player in a lot of that. Truck stop electrification. There's less focus on that now since a lot of that has already been done. Public education, rideshare. There's a big focus on sustainability, which includes land use, connecting different transportation options. And you can see an image here of our mobility hub, which is a concept that really ties together different mobility options throughout the region. We want to see more of those. We emphasize native landscaping and green infrastructure, and we're pretty heavily focused on green infrastructure right now and building out real strategies that can be undertaken by local governments. Energy efficiency, those will always be really important. And then we're also focusing again on that transportation connectivity and transportation technology. And I didn't put this on here, but public education, or public engagement rather, is also a continued focus. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, hold on one second, I think I went too far. Is that right? Okay, we wanted to talk a little bit about air quality and climate change. And we know we targeted this presentation to a lot of the Climate Action KC folks, so that you're armed with information about what the difference between air quality and climate change is and how they're related. They definitely feed into one another, but they're different things. With climate change, we could see increased unhealthy levels of ozone, mostly because as climate change, one of the hazards that we can expect here in our region and that you are familiar with is increased heat. We're seeing more days with heat in our region, and this could potentially create what we call stagnation events, where combined with heat, we have air that just is still and not moving and is trapped, and this creates perfect conditions for unhealthy ozone. Increased allergens is another potential impact of climate change, and we know, unfortunately, Kansas and Missouri are both hot spots for allergens in the country. So we can expect that not only will we see those increased allergens, but air pollution, ozone will exacerbate the effects that we all feel with these increased allergens. As far as other health issues, air pollution will continue to aggravate different cardiovascular and respiratory illnesses that people have, general heart disease, asthma, those type of things. But we do know that a lot of the interventions that we might employ to help reduce CO2 in our region will also help decrease ozone precursor emissions. So we call those co-benefits. And one of the hot areas of focus will be transportation, because as of 2017, transportation is now the top source of greenhouse gases in the region. So, and a lot of, you know, our ozone precursor emissions come from transportation. So there's a lot of opportunity here in this area to reduce both those COTs and precursor emissions, and will be a heavy focus of the Cleaner Action Plan that we are working on right now. So air quality and equity. So we know, kind of generally speaking across the country, that low-income communities of color typically bear a disproportionate burden from air pollution. While this needs to be more studied more in depth in the Kansas City region, we know that our environmental justice communities, they have a higher rate of asthma and other health issues. And so even though we know we need to do a little more study to kind of hone in on this topic, we respond as if this is the case, that these communities are having a disproportionate impact from air pollution. And some of the reasons may be obvious, maybe not, but low-income and minority communities typically reside closer to pollution sources, whether that's point sources or area sources or mobile sources. And I think vehicular traffic is a great example. We know that Jackson County residents, specifically in these environmental justice areas, tend to have older vehicles than the rest of the country. And because they're older vehicles, they don't have updated emissions technology built into them. And so as people are driving around in these older vehicles, there's likely more pollution, more exhaust, whether that's PM 2.5 or otherwise. It's something we want to, again, focus on. And some of the impacts, the health impacts, again, that these communities are feeling are, you know, asthma related, heart conditions, and higher rates of premature death. So this is definitely something that we're focused on and want to do more research on. And then air quality and COVID-19. So we had several people actually email asking us if we would include some of this information in this presentation, and we're absolutely happy to. Upon some of the research that I did, I was just curious if anybody had started studying this, the connection between air quality and COVID-19. And you've seen on the news that, you know, LA's air quality has greatly improved, and so has different metro areas in the East Coast and some in the Midwest. You've seen news about that. But Harvard actually started a study that's focused on PM 2.5 and looking at the different death rates. And they're definitely, with the limited information that they have right now from the COVID death rate, preliminary results are showing that there is some sort of correlation there. So metropolitan areas that have higher PM 2.5 levels also have a higher death rate. And again, the preliminary results, they'll have a better scope of study once we have more information from the CDC. But anecdotally, I think this makes sense. The CDC has also been looking at the death rate and know that the Black population particularly is being just disproportionately more affected. And because the Black population is, you know, part of our environmental justice areas in the Kansas City region, this is concerning. So they kind of have this double whammy, air quality and COVID impacts. And I wanted to show this map. Some of you have seen it, that KCMO put out showing the zip codes and the total confirmed cases of COVID. And you can see that some of the areas that have higher than average kind of minority and low income populations are showing higher confirmed cases of COVID. So that's very concerning, and I'm sure there'll be additional study to understand that a little bit more. As a kind of a proxy to understand what's happening with automobile emissions in the region, we've worked with KC Scout to pull some data of traffic volumes on various road sectors throughout the region to get a sense of what the % decrease in normal weekday traffic volumes are. So this is information going back to March 16th, and I highlighted the March 24th bar because that's the first day of the stay-at-home order. And you can see that we're seeing a significant reduction in that volume. If you take an average of just the weekdays, we're seeing a 40% average reduction in traffic volume, and on the weekends we're seeing a 60% reduction in traffic volume. And I think it's interesting, this 70% that you see on March 23rd, I think that was likely because people knew it was the day before the stay-at-home order took place, and so everybody was out trying to run their errands. But you can make assumptions based on this information that because we're seeing these 60 and 40% weekday volume decreases, that we're also seeing that similar decrease in auto emissions as well, which impacts air quality, of course. So this is our last slide, and we'll try to wrap this up so we can get to some of the questions. But we wanted to leave you with a little bit of some takeaways. So what is your role? First, we want to make sure that you're staying informed with SkyCast. SkyCast is really there to help us take measures, be proactive ahead of when we expect there to be elevated levels of ozone. We want you to take actions to protect your health, whether that's staying in, maybe find a different way to get to work that may produce less emissions. At work, there's a lot that can be done. Making sure that air quality is part of your sustainability plan is a good idea. So if you're part of a green team or something similar, maybe suggesting different things that could be included. These include just general awareness of employees, making sure they understand air quality and the impacts that maybe their commuting is taking. Energy efficiency, what can your work do to become more efficient? Commuting, are there different incentives that employers can provide to maybe get people to ride the bus 1 day or 2 days per week, or carpool with their fellow employees? Company fleets. I know at MARC we've been trying to transition our fleets to hybrid and plug-in hybrid electric. There's a lot of ways that employers can do that. Contractor requirements, requiring that contractors follow a lot of the same policies. And then facility maintenance. Those are great things that can be incorporated into those sustainability plans. There's a lot of home and community solutions, some of which are listed here. And all of these can be found at airqkc.org. As I mentioned, the Air Quality Forum is always open to the public. We meet every single month, the first Tuesday at 10 a.m. at MARC. And we invite you to come and learn a little bit more about air quality and how you can get involved. And then we also ask you to advocate. So, take this knowledge that you learned from this presentation and help advocate for better practices and policies that come from the Clean Air Action Plan. And if you're ever interested, if you're from a local government or a neighborhood group, we're always happy to come out and provide information about the Clean Air Action Plan and really drill down into strategies that your organization can take on. We're happy to do that. So that kind of wraps up our presentation. I'm going to ask Doug to unmute his mic, and then I believe we had a couple of questions come through, and Paul is here to help moderate that as well. So if you have questions, type them into that chat box and we'll do our best to answer those for you.
All right, so this is Paul Lampy from MARC, and our first question is, what do we know about the impact of small engines? And this is including lawn equipment, leaf blowers, golf carts, etc. So.
Okay, Doug, do you want to take that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there have been some improvements on air pollution controls for small engines. I want to say it's 2014 is when some of those went into effect. Generally speaking, though, people don't buy a new mower every year, so there are quite a few that are kind of get nursed along for quite a few years after those improvements have gone into place. There's a challenge with small motors and small pieces of equipment in that you can't attach a lot of pollution device to those things. That's why motorcycles, for example, even though it's a smaller engine and you can get better mileage, the emissions controls that are potentially available for motorcycles are not as robust as what's available for a full-size car. That said, there have been improvements. There have been efforts made. 4-stroke engines are better than 2-stroke, and so that's one thing to look at as a consumer when you're going to be buying vehicles. And then even better, there are, in some cases, alternative fuel type equipment that you can buy. So there are both there's propane powered equipment for forklifts, and there's some for mowers. You just need to look around a little bit, and you can get away from some of those gasoline powered ones. The things you really want to kind of stay away from, and I don't know that they're around quite so much anymore, is where you have to do a mix of fuel and oil. So you mix gasoline and oil in a 50-50 mix, and it burns that straight. That does release quite a bit of emissions.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Our second question for the day is, what is the reasoning for not having monitoring sites in Kansas City, Missouri, or Southeast Jackson County? How are sites decided to be suitable for monitoring?
I can do that one too if you'd like, Karen.
Sure, go for it.
There's quite a bit of thought that goes into picking a location, and we do have we don't, of course, but the states have some monitors that are in those more urban areas, particularly the 2.5 monitors. There's one on Troost. There's another one on Blue Ridge and I-70. And if you remember when I was talking earlier, ozone is a pollutant that has the two precursors, the VOCs and the NOx, the NO2, that need to combine over time and have some sunlight in order to react. So we won't really get a good idea of what the ozone level is until we get the contribution of all of those sources and they've had a time to chemically react. So the network of monitors for ozone is fairly broadly dispersed, and that's to give us a good idea of what kind of air quality is developing around the region, and we can catch high concentrations or higher concentrations of ozone depending on which way the wind is blowing. And so we'll have it can kind of pass over different monitors at different locations. We do have, like I said, we do have a couple monitors that are kind of in the southwest portion of the region and even a little bit outside of our air maintenance boundary. And those are to get an idea of what we have coming in. But it'll take some time for the emissions that are generated in Johnson County and Wyandotte and Jackson have a chance to chemically react in order to result in those higher pollution values that we'll see around Rocky Creek and Liberty. So that's kind of why it's there. When we post an ozone alert day and we're doing our forecasting, if we have any one of those monitors that goes over the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, the NAAOS, then the whole region is considered to be, in an exceedance. So it doesn't, even if the monitored value occurs out at Watkins Mill, we consider the whole region to be kind of in contribution to that, and that the air quality is of concern.
All right, Doug and Karen, we have 2 more questions. One of them is, will the presentation be available online later?
Yes, Yes,
Yeah.
so we're recording the presentation right now. We will post that recording on our air quality forum website, and we'll also email it out to everybody who was emailed this morning with the meeting details.
All right. I guess, all right, we just have one more question come in, but so let's answer these
Okay.
last two. There's one, you mentioned older vehicles in the presentation. What criteria defines an older vehicle?
So I think I can answer that. Doug might have his perspective as well, but if you're thinking about vehicles in terms of the different technologies and the requirements as kind of vehicles evolve, EPA has set, I believe, different tiers for vehicles. And I want to say older vehicles, like older than, mid 2000s, are ones that don't have I don't know, the kind of the better of the emissions technologies built into them. But all cars are a little bit different, so it's kind of hard to answer that question. But older vehicles are ones that are, antiques, of course, ones from the 80s and 90s mostly, generally speaking. So we should probably start wrapping it up. So we had an additional question, right? Oh, household hazardous waste. What emissions testings are available? So we do gas cap testing at some of them. We always do tailpipe testing. So we put a stick in the tailpipe and it reads out the different emissions from that vehicle. We also do a check, kind of a check of the engine, just to make sure everything is okay. We check tire pressure as well, because how well your tire's inflated has an impact on your emissions. And then we also do kind of a courtesy check of your wipers and your taillights as well. And we put out information on when those events take place. Some of them have been postponed to the later in the year, but you can find information on airqkc.org about those. So just to wrap it up, I'll say thank you to everybody. We had a really great turnout. We appreciate it. Again, we'll post the recorded presentation, and we'll also send that out to all of you when that's available. So thank you. Have a good day.